The town of Somerset West in the Western Cape of South Africa was no stranger to scandal and turmoil. It was founded in the 1600s as a cattle farm, and as other such small towns in South Africa at the time, it was rife with racism and prejudice. Hottentot's Holland Mountains, the name given to the hill by the town, was a derogatory title. A stark reminder that although buildings have changed and malls have developed, the echoes of colonialism and apartheid continue to show and shadow the town. But like most out-of-towners, I instantly fell in love with the town's charm. With its Cape Dutch-style gables, it wasn't difficult to hear the whispers of horse hooves. Most of the town had been newly built, Art Deco buildings and the occasional shopping centre, but a large part remained, a testament to the perseverance of the past. I found myself relocating to the coastal town when I accepted a job as a dental assistant at one of the local dentistries. It wasn't like I wasn't able to get a job in the town I was in previously, but after breaking up with my boyfriend of 9 years, I felt I needed a fresh start. Somerset West looked like it would provide me with the solace I sought. On one of my first days in the town, I took myself for a tour of the streets. It didn't occur to me whether it was safe for a 20-something white female to be roaming the streets alone. My first stop was one of those local eateries, where I tried a secret sunrise breakfast that wasn't much of a surprise, save the boerewors in place of an English sausage. Continuing on my excursion, I passed several dilapidated houses, long since had they received the attention of the town. Notable landmarks and churches, however, had been recently upgraded, a clear indication to the town's priorities. Somerset West grew up around a Dutch Reformed church that was built in 1819 and therefore lay as heart of the town. Gothic Revival style, it stood intimidating those that walked beneath its eyes. I had never been a serious churchgoer, but on that particular day, perhaps to find some solace of safety, I entered through the thick wood door into the church. I had been in enough churches to recognize the silence. I had come in between services, and so the grand room lay empty. I seated myself at one of the pews and stared up at the stained glass windows above the altar. The sun was coming from the opposite direction, and so it wasn't particularly easy to make out the shapes and stories of the glass designs. They were beautiful all the same. The candles flickering below reflected off the panes. It had a hypnotic feel. My attention was pulled back into the room slowly as I became aware of movement in the corner. I squinted in the dim light to make out any shapes in the shadows. Save for a darker shadow, I could make nothing out. But just as I was about to convince myself that my time in a larger city had made me paranoid, I saw the darker shadow move. My lungs began to cave in on themselves as all of my senses worked on discovering the origins of the shadow. I slowly rose from the pew and slid my way out. I suspected I was being ridiculous and that it was probably nothing more than a church cat. But no more had the thought crept into my mind that I saw the dark shape grow larger, accompanied by a strange humming. I made my way along the stone wall into the shadowed corner. A door unveiled itself as my eyes adjusted to the darkness. Inhaling slowly, I made my way to push the door open. A fluorescent lit corridor lay just through the door, an empty corridor. The origins of the shadow had disappeared. Still confused by the shadow, I made my way out of the building, and as I turned left out of the church door, I was met with a dusty shirt with a sour smell. Bewildered, I looked up and into the face of a white man. His face was sunburnt, a clear indication of his outdoor labors. Despite the redness, I was still able to make out the dark shadows beneath his eyes. His hair, or what little he had left, was greasy. His pale lips strained into a smile. "You're new," he rasped. "I am. I just arrived in town and I'm taking myself on a tour." I put my hand out in greeting. "My name is McKenna." He ignored my hand, not even glancing in its direction. "Well, you've come to the right place. There's no better church in town than this one. You're a church-going sort." "I have been," I replied, aware that my answers were being evaluated scrupulously. "And now?" "When I get a chance." "Well, let's hope that chance comes soon, for your sake." And the man moved around me, close enough for my shirt to be covered in dust, and away whispering as he did so, "Ad fontes." The next day I was preoccupied with learning the ropes of my new job. Assistant did not mean just handing my boss a tool or two or asking a patient to spit on command. I found myself sorting through years of neglected files. "You'll also have to phone around to see which of those patients are dead now, Miss Kent." I looked up from the filing cabinet, careful not to hit the side of it. "Doctor?" Some of my patients were so old, so I doubt they're still around. I nodded slowly, morbidly amused. "Ah, got it." I heard a sneeze from the doctor's direction. "Bless you, Doc." "Thank you, but it's not the dentist, Miss Kent." I looked up into the ruddy face of my acquaintance from the church. "Oh, hello. Can I help you? Sorry, I never got your name yesterday." "Joseph. Cope. But everyone calls me Joe." "Hi, Joe." I was beginning to get the sense that perhaps Joe was not altogether present, that much of his mind was being occupied elsewhere, that social interactions did not come naturally to him. "And what can I do for you? Do you need an appointment?" "No, I've come to see you." "Oh." I decided to ignore the question at the knot of my stomach of how he knew where to find me. "I wanted to find out if we'll see you at the service on Sunday." "This Sunday?" "I'll try, Joe, but I'm still trying to get my flat sorted and haven't unpacked anything yet." "That'd be a shame, McKenna. You wouldn't want to disappoint God." I shook my head in bewilderment. "No, It wasn't a question, Miss Kent. I had a dream last night that you were engulfed in flames." "I was. I suspect that it was the devil trying to make me confused and upset. Nevertheless, we wouldn't want that to happen." He paused before he walked away silently. "We'll see you tomorrow. Ad fontes." And he disappeared behind the office wall, the sound of the front door closing behind him. I wasn't sure how much stock I should take in Joe's dream, but I decided not to chance it. And so I found myself at Pastor Alfred's 9 a.m. service that Sunday. He was a charismatic man, but with a true sincerity. I could quickly tell how well liked he was by the congregation. At the end of the service, I made my way outside. The sun had slowly disappeared during the service under a blanket of cloud, and I went in search of it, walking between the gravestones of the church's cemetery. I was just admiring the facial relief of a certain Jan Henrik Hofmeyer when the now familiar sour smell joined me. "Hello, Joe," I said pleasantly. "Good girl." he replied without returning the greeting. I resented the girl reference, but was beginning to see the eggshells I was having to dodge around Joseph, and so continued unabated. It was a lovely service. Pastor Alfred seems good. Pastor Alfred is the greatest messenger of God, he said. He is all that epitomizes goodness. The divine speaks through him. I turned to look at Joe for the first time, noticing as I did so the cuts on his arms. Some of them were fresh. Do you work here, Joe? I live and work here. I live for the church and I live for God. They're lucky to have someone as dedicated as you. Devotion is not just a dedication. My devotion is a calling. Joe. A voice from behind us came as a welcome reprieve from the heaviness of the conversation. Pastor Alfred walked up to us. May I ask you to please refresh the water jugs at the back? Our congregation seems to be thirsty today. Of course. Joe left without a further word, save for his characteristic ad fontes. I see you have met Joe. I took a deep breath in. Yes, I have. He's interesting and very devout. That he is. I'm sorry we haven't met. My name is Pastor Alfred. Hi, I'm McKenna Kent. Pastor Alfred's camel-hued handshake was as warm as his smile. Lovely to see you, McKenna. Look, I wouldn't be too perturbed by Joe. He can seem intense, but he's harmless. I smiled. I'm sure. He's just a bit fanatical. He found himself in a bad bout of depression several years back. His mother brought him here, hoping to bring him some respite. He claims the church drove the devil out of him, and he's been here ever since. He calls himself the Watcher. The Watcher? Looking out for the church, for me and for God. I nodded slowly. And what is this ad fontes that he keeps saying? It loosely translates to back to the sources. The church used it hundreds of years ago to mobilize the congregation and the town to worship in the olden, better ways. I raised my eyebrows. That's intense. Indeed it is. I left Pastor Alfred to his congregation, graciously passing on a cup of tea in what I assumed is called the rectory. In the weeks that followed, I found myself floundering in a sea of yellowing patient folders and unopened boxes. My hours were long, and by the time I got home, I found my face plastered to the armrest of the only couch I owned. I had little time to cook for myself, often just eating tomato sauce beans right out of the tin. At least it made for less washing up. One evening, I arrived to a familiar smell and found Joe standing against the foot of my door. Hi, Joe. What a lovely surprise. I didn't know you knew where I lived. It's a small town, he replied. Right, and what can I do for you, Joe? You haven't been to church in 2 weeks. I know, I've been wanting to. I'm just drowning at the moment. The church will help you swim, Miss Kent. I paused, once again dodging eggshells. I'm sure it would. I just honestly don't have the time at the moment. I'll try and make it next Sunday. You'd better, McKenna. I sense the devil has already been flirting with you, enticing you, lifting your skirt. Joe, you don't want to go to bed with the devil, McKenna. I'd be very careful if I were you. And as was customary, he left with no farewell but only his quiet cry of ad fontes. Joe's presence at my flat left me a little unsettled for the rest of the evening. I made a note to call Pastor Alfred in the morning. Before I got the chance to do so, however, I arrived at work with a small box waiting for me. Inside was a dead moth with a note. The scrawled writing read, Ad Fontes. I didn't need to guess who had left the moth, or what the moth meant, but a dead anything, I surmised, was not a good thing. That evening I received a phone call from my brother. He would be passing through Somerset on his way to Mitchell's Plain. He was a police officer, and the area was fast becoming in need of additional support. I made plans to meet him for a not-so-secret breakfast on a Sunday morning. I was looking forward to seeing my big brother. He had moved out before I finished high school. In fact, I saw my sister-in-law more often than I saw my brother. Breakfast turned into coffee and cake after, as my brother finally continued his journey later that afternoon. I decided to stop past the dentistry to pick up some more folders to go through that evening. The rooms were dim amber and quiet. My back was to the front door, facing the filing cabinets that I had left unlocked. I gathered a dozen or so folders and stood to make my way out. As I turned, I saw Joe standing in the doorway, a severed dentist's drill in his hand. "Joe? You never came to service again today, McKenna." "Joe, you're making me a little nervous. Did you break the dentist's drill?" "You promised you would, McKenna." "I know I did, Joe, but my brother came to visit and I hadn't seen him in ages." "Is your brother more important than our father?" "Joe, please, I know how you're feeling, but please listen and try to understand." "You know how I'm feeling?" He stepped closer to me. "You can't possibly understand the ways of the Lord. You don't understand. You have no faith. Those who have no faith must be persecuted." I had no idea how to get past Joe, but I knew that I had to make my way through the front door. And so I started to pray. "Our Father, you think your prayers will save you now, girl?" I fished for the words from my childhood. "Hallowed be thy name." Joe stepped through the doorway even closer to me. "Thy will be done," I continued. I'm not sure whether it was coincidence, or if in fact my prayers were answered. But just as Joe had taken another step towards me, he landed face down by my feet. I looked up into the face of my brother and Pastor Alfred. I didn't know how they knew to come to my rescue, but I decided to pop into service that Sunday, just in case.